Hello, my friends. So this is the long-awaited live on Bridgerton. I feel like I need to learn how to say that in a British accent. And we're going to talk about Bridgerton in general, and specifically the sex scenes, and specifically the rape scene. Hi, all you guys. Ilana Benzel, Dina Mark. Hello. Oh, it's my friend Gabi and Sarah Mizrahi. Woohoo! I'm waiting for my friend Ora Weinbach to join us, and Ora joined Instagram seriously, specifically to do this talk with me. Chaya, the embryologist, is on here. You should follow her if you don't. Startup Rabbi Gabi says hi. Come on, Ora. I know you're not hiding. I know you're back. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going to now invite Ora Weinbach to join us. Ora Weinbach, come on in. Stupendous and amazing. And she'll be amazing for this particular call. Hi, Daphne. There's a Daphne joining us. I'm so excited. Hi.
Hi.
I'm like, everybody, this is Ora. Ora joined Instagram. I swear to you, in order to do this live with me. How are you, Ora?
I'm good. I'm excited to be on Instagram. Hi, everyone.
Isn't that cool? Look, I'm wearing my Bridgerton earrings. Did you ever notice the jewels those women wore? Like, unbelievable, right? Anyway,
the prince gave her. I was like, where did she get that?
And then she left it on this. I thought that was going to be part of the plot. I'm sure they cut something out. Because she left it kind of sitting there on the wall, and I thought for sure he was going to find it and be all upset, right?
Exactly. And I was like, oh no, she actually just left this like priceless heirloom.
Exactly.
She's like, oh, done with this. I have a duke now.
Exactly. That is, she gave it the prince. Well, we need to discuss that. But anyway, Ora is a divinity student. Does that really teach you to be divine? Because other people make that joke also.
I become a goddess when I graduate.
I love it. And Ora developed the sex ed program for one of the Jewish day schools in Manhattan. And that's how we became friends. Ora is one of the smartest, funniest, fun, interesting people I know. So I'm so glad you're here. And before we dive into the, complicated parts of Bridgerton, what they're all complicated, can we just talk about how much we liked it?
Oh my God. It's like it's hard to talk about because I just like giggle. I started and I watched the first episode and I was like, oh, this will be my relaxation TV. And I was like, okay, this is fun. I watched the second episode, fourth episode, stayed up all night. I couldn't stop watching.
It's crazy, right? Because it's not really a good show. I have to say, it was not really a good show, but it was eye candy. I mean, the whole thing was candy. Wasn't it candy?
Yeah,
right,
well,
exactly.
I think it's fun. I mean, it depends on what you call a good show. I personally never watch TV, just I don't have Instagram. But for me, if I want to watch a show, I want to be taken somewhere else. And this just took me somewhere else.
So if you want to watch a good show, I will say The Queen's Gambit. I don't know who's watching right now. People say The Queen's Gambit, that was a really good show, but it was not eye candy at all. Just saying. But this was, everything was beautiful. I mean, everything was beautiful. The people, the clothing, the jewelry, the dancing. I know it was inspired my earrings. Yeah, no, the flowers. Oh my God, the flowers. I just wanted to live in the lilacs. It was just crazy, right? Okay. But it was also really sexy. I mean, I think that was a big, people are giving me hearts here. Yes, guys, I know. We all thought this was really sexy, this show. And, let's talk about that for a moment before we go into the more complicated questions. How's that?
What got me was, the sex was sexy for sure. But what got me was even, there was no sex in the show until, the sixth episode or something. I mean, there were, scenes. But the thing that I thought was so fascinating was the eroticism of it, of the, heightened sense of the seriousness and sexuality of just touching, of just being alone in a room together. And I assume we're spoiling this whole thing for everybody. So if you don't want to,
well, if they're watching it, I assume you have to be there. Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't spoil it because it's fun. I can watch it again.
It's not about the plot. The scene where they're at the boxing rink and he's cheering for his friend. He rolls up his sleeves and it shows his arm. And I was like, woo, that arm. And I'm it's an arm, relax. But there was just,
So my reaction, I'll tell you my scene, and you guys should write as you're watching. Feel free to type in your favorite scenes. But like the thing that I loved was they were dancing at one point, and his fingers stroked the back of her neck. Do you remember? Like they just touched the back of her neck, and I remember thinking, oh my God! And I think it just shows us how right the eroticism isn't always in the sex itself. Getting lots of hearts on that. The eroticism isn't always in the sex itself. Somebody just said, I have 15 minutes left of the last episode, and I assume you guys are going to ruin this for me. No, don't
No,
worry.
you're fine.
You're fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like, I think it reminds us that, like, a lot of times when we think about, like, sex, it's not just, like, penis and vagina or, like, intercourse. There's so many erogenous zones and so many parts, like physical parts of the body that can be arousing and feel good. And then there's also just the fact that, like, half of it is your brain. It's like not even just the body. It's your brain. It's the buildup. It's the excitement. It's the
suggestion.
And the forbiddenness.
The forbidden, right.
The transgression is also very exciting.
Absolutely. No, and I think that was one of the things the show got right. And the truth is, it's a woman producer. They made a big deal out of that. And there was a lens. It was really from a woman's lens. And I have to say, one scene that made me sort of almost jump up and scream hallelujah, to tell you the truth, was the first time they have, after they get married, the first time they have sex, and he says to her, use your hand, right? And I'm like, I spend my entire life telling women it's okay to use your hand when you're having intercourse or when you're having sex with your partner. It's not only okay, but it's good. And I feel like in 5 minutes, they did like a world of good for me, because I have never seen that in a show before. Have you ever seen that in a show before?
Not a show to be like,
exactly. It's all about like stick the penis in the vagina, have an orgasm that way, which doesn't happen for most people, and then like go on your way, right? And so this was such a different take on it. And it was so, and also when you see them having sex, which that whole, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, I think even before that, when she clearly doesn't know any, we could talk about her lack of sex education.
So can we talk, I do want to talk about that for a moment. Yes.
When they set it up such that like, there's a scene where he's essentially explaining to her in like, really like in a ways that like, I would say, right, like amazing, very like comprehensive, progressive terms, like how to masturbate as a woman. And like, I
know. Yes, I know.
Watching this, and now they know that they can masturbate and they can orgasm. That was never in anything that I've ever watched, like for sure not as like a teenager. And I was just like, thank God there are young women watching this being like, oh, maybe I'm gonna try to do that today. And I'm like,
and then they showed her trying it, which was amazing. And you know, it's funny because you see it in shows like Sex Education, which does a really good job actually also, but that feels very different. That I think for a lot of women, especially women who come from maybe a slightly more conservative background, because that Sex Education is so out there, you know what I mean? Like it's so out there. So I just felt like I agree with you.
Everyone's watching this. Like
right. It's really, I really have to give her a lot of credit, Shonda Rhimes or whatever her name is, because I feel like, and it was funny because I'm trying to get in touch actually with, they have these now sex scene coordinators on film sets.
Yeah, so he talked about that in an interview.
Who did?
The main character, the guy, I don't know his name.
The Duke?
But yeah, the Duke. But people like
just call him the Duke.
The Duke. Like people are like, oh, what was it like to do these sex scenes? And he's like, it's just like every other scene. Like there's a director, they tell you what to do, it's planned out. He's like, it was the same way with the sex scenes, which is kind of also, I think, like a really healthy thing that is being shared publicly about the way sex is done in movies and TV, because it didn't just happen magically like that. Someone literally scripted that to be perfect.
Exactly. And the truth is, in the last, I think, 5 years or so, they've put people on the set. Specifically, they're called intimacy coaches, directors, or something. I don't know what they're called, but they're there both to try to make the scenes effective, but also keep the actors and actresses safe, right? That's like, right? So in other words, that their job is to make sure that people aren't uncomfortable, that people are doing things that they're not getting pushed into doing things they don't want to do. Exactly. It's a whole genre, and I'm trying to get one of them on with me live. So I just think it would be so fun. Anyway, so I'm working on that. Exactly. You'll log on back on Twitter anyway. Okay. So now that we talked about all the things that we liked about the show and we thought were great about the show, maybe we'll end with that as well. Let's just talk a little bit about that controversial scene. And so
Can I just
Let
stop you and say, so I know we publicized and we said like the rape scene in your publicity about it. So I said something to somebody who I'm close with who's watched the show, and I was like, oh, we're going to be talking about the rape scene. And she literally was like, the rape scene? What rape scene? And I was like, and I was going to tell her, she's like, no, I'm thinking about it. And she's like, okay, episode 1, episode 2, like she literally went through the entire, and she guessed like 2 other scenes that had nothing to do with rape. She's like, is it this scene? And she could not even identify which scene we were talking about. And I just think that highlights like how fascinating this conversation is going to be for us and like for a lot of people listening.
I agree 100%. I had that conversation, that exact same conversation with a few different people. I actually wouldn't, I'll tell you the truth. I was talking about Bridgerton when I had watched 2 episodes or 3 episodes, and I was talking about using it as a fantasy because, you know, I do fantasy Fridays, and I'm like, right, right. So, and somebody said, well, what do you think about the rape scene? And I'm like, what rape scene? Now, to be fair, I hadn't gotten there yet, but but I'm not sure I would have called it a rape scene. I just had started getting DMs from people saying, what about the rape scene? What do you think about the rape scene? And I know it kind of hit a controversy. So that's, I think, one of the things we need to talk about is what that should be called and whether rape scene is a legitimate thing to call it. And okay, so I know you have very strong feelings about this. All right. And I
Yeah.
want you to start with your, and I wanted to tell you that I did this poll, right? I did this poll about whether or not this was a rape, you know, was actually a rape scene. And I think it came out like 80-20 or 70-30 or something like that, with people saying, no, they did not think it was a rape. Sarah Mizrahi, if you're following, I know you felt strongly about that. And you were like in shock that people felt that way. And so why don't you start?
Sure. Well, I first want to start by just saying that it always is complicated when we're using the word rape, because I think when we like, first of all, there could be people who are listening here who are rape victims and have experienced this in their life, and I just want to like acknowledge that and recognize that it's like complicated, that we're talking about this beautiful, wonderful fantasy world, and was this like lovely happily ever after story, was there a component of rape here? And like that feels very disparate than like most people's real life experience of rape, and I just want to like name that.
No, you know what? Thank you so much for that. And also, obviously, I'm going to say this, even though you know this, if you're going to find this triggering in any way, don't watch. Like, I really, we're not doing this in any way to upset anybody. So, okay.
Yeah. And I think also using the word rape is complicated because I think most of us go to like a certain place of the most obvious, most extreme kinds of like dark alley grabbing, forcing situations. And this obviously was not that. I think maybe it's a little bit easier to talk about it as lack of consent. When there's an absence of consent, I think some people say like absence of consent equals rape, and that's the end of their sentence. And so if that's how you're going to define it, then this for sure to me was a rape scene. There was an absence of consent. If we want to be a little bit more nuanced in the way we're talking about it, maybe we want to shift our language to talk about like there wasn't complete consent.
Or so sexual assault. I mean, I really would like, I'd like to stay on that for a minute, because I feel like I wouldn't have called it rape. And honestly, I actually went out and talked to some lawyers because I was actually kind of curious about that, being related to a lawyer myself. So, one person said to me, by no definition was this rape. It could have been sexual assault, which doesn't in any way minimize it, but I am a word person. And so I don't like it when everybody throws everything, like exactly what you said, which is an absence of consent equivalent to rape. I do not think it's equivalent to rape. I think it's horrific, but it's not equivalent to rape. And so I'm not even saying it's equivalent. It just isn't rape. It may be equivalent to it, but it's just not the same thing. And I don't like to mix those things up. So I feel like that I think is, and what I'd like to come out of this conversation with is with new thoughts or ideas, not a decision, yes, no, yeah. That's not what we're after, right? We're after thinking about these things in a more complex, nuanced manner. Okay.
So well, now, I think that scene accomplished that for us, because what was evident the second I was done, and by the way, we're being vague about what scene it is. Do you want to
yes,
describe
please.
it, or should I just
you describe it? You describe it.
Sure. So the scene we're talking about is basically the background, for those of you who are living under a rock and haven't for some reason watched the show, is she ends up married to the Duke. Our protagonist ends up married to the Duke. And he basically has told her that he can't have children. We know as the audience that it's because he made some vow on his father's deathbed that he would never marry and have children to continue the line for like his own like angsty whatever reasons. But he basically tells her that he can't have children. And she assumes that means it's because he's physically incapable. And because of her absolutely horrendous sexuality education, which I would like love to talk about a little bit later.
Okay, could we stop for a second?
Yeah.
Her mother gives her a 30-second sex talk before she's married that says absolutely nothing. Nothing, right? So she says something about you've seen a sheep, pretty much, right? I think I'm trying.
I mean, I could start talking about, can we come back to this? Because
We're going to come back. We're
okay,
going to
let's
come back to it. Okay.
So basically, she doesn't know that in order to have children, what is necessary is ejaculation in the vaginal canal. So what happens is she has sex with him, and it's like amazing. And like I use the word sex intentionally because they're having sex, but right before he comes, every time he comes outside of her, and she like clearly doesn't understand.
And they're having every kind of sex. So if they're having oral sex, they're having every kind of sex. When they have intercourse, he's always pulling out and ejaculating outside of her, and she doesn't know that that's unusual.
She doesn't understand that that's what's preventing her from getting pregnant because she.
Which, by the way, it wouldn't prevent her from getting pregnant. So I just would like to add that in. Okay, just I needed to throw that in.
Thank you, by the way. I would like, yes, that was probably their best form of contraceptive, or one of their best forms of contraceptive at the time, but it is not effective and not recommended.
Right.
Anyway, thank you. That's an important note. So basically, she learns, however, the whole backstory is irrelevant, but she learns that in order to get pregnant, you need internal ejaculation, and she realizes that that's what's been happening. And she doesn't talk to him about this at all. But they're having sex, and at the last minute, he's about to pull out and come outside of her, and she kind of flips on top of him, stays on top of him, keeps moving, and he ejaculates inside of her. And immediately after, when they separate, he's like confused. He's like, what happened? And then she's like clearly upset. And then he realizes that she did it on purpose in order to conceive. That's maybe my interpretation, but I think that's pretty clear.
No, I would read it the exact same way. Right.
Okay. So I watched this and I was like, the second it was over, I was like, oh my God. Like when we talk about consent, like and this is where gender becomes so important. To me, if the genders were reversed, I think people would think this was much clearer. And as somebody who I think it's important to like think about the way we talk about consent, because sometimes we're less likely to talk about male rape, and male rape can and does happen. And to me, this is a scene of which I think we're less used to thinking about in our society, of a woman breaching and kind of pushing sexually and breaching the boundaries of a male partner. And if the roles were reversed and there was a conversation where it was like, no, don't come inside of me, I don't want you to come inside of me, and then the male just was like, actually I will, and intentionally clearly does anyway, like to me that would be so obvious that was non-consensual intercourse. And I think it's hard sometimes to recognize because the genders are reversed of what we're used to. But I was happy that this show is like pushing back at that. And to me, it was very clear that this was a non-consensual moment in what otherwise would have been consensual. But when I teach sex ed and when I talk about the importance of being in constant communication with your partner, like it's important to always ask and at any point when somebody says stop or I'm done or I don't want to do this, or makes it clear from the beginning that there's something they don't want to do, any violation of that I think is a violation of consent. And I don't think it's necessarily about like, what could he have done? He was so strong, right? Somebody, he could have pushed her off. Like,
right. Somebody just wrote that, and
yeah,
right. He could have flipped over, right? Which is not totally illegitimate. It's not total.
I think people lose themselves in the passion, and like I get it, but that doesn't mean that's not like
right. The question is, here's where I'm going to push back a little bit, Ora, because I kind of do agree with you, and I don't know exactly where. I mean, I know I have lots of feelings about this. The largest being is all because nobody was talking to each other, which is usually the biggest problem. So, but I do get that it's fiction. I can't rewrite the story. So, but the thing about when you say he's strong enough to flip over, right? So I guess the thing here is that it feels like it was a breach of contract in a certain way. Like he said, I don't want to ejaculate in you. And she said, I'm going to make you ejaculate in me, right? Like that is sort of right. But he never said that, right? So in other words, she was sort of guessing at that. Like she was one could make the argument that she was thinking he didn't want to ejaculate inside of her, but she wasn't clear about that. Now, You feel like that's stretching it? You
Well,
feel like
no,
that's
it's not
stretching it?
even stretching it. It's that when I teach about consent, and I think this is really true, I think there's lots of different ways to communicate. And I think when we limit communication to verbal communication, it's those are not the only other those are not the other kinds of communication. There's verbal communication, and then there's also physical communication. And it's not just about words, it's also about like the way you move and noises you make, right? And it was very clear that he was ready to do something else, and
That he
she,
wanted her to stop.
right, like, and that, and like, I think that, like, just because he didn't say I don't want to come inside of you, like that,
Right.
that's not the only way to communicate that. And I think it's important because oftentimes when the reverse happens, we consider it non-consensual and sexual assault. Like a lot of times, like, girls don't want to be there anymore, and so they like go limp and wait till it's over. Like that
Right.
should be just as much a sign of lack of consent. Like, if, like, it should be mutual, and it was clear to me that.
Right.
And
Right.
again,
No, and honestly, the analogy somebody gave me in one of the comments, which I thought was perfect, was if a guy said, "I'll, I'm wearing a condom," and then in the middle, he's about to have intercourse and she's not looking, and he yanks the condom off, we would all be horrified by that, right? Like we would think that was really some version of sexual assault, and so that was sort of the analogy there, right? Like, I mean, I
yeah.
think
And I to like go back to your point about like speaking to a lawyer, like I think it's interesting. And I think sometimes though, like if that's an important question to ask, I think sometimes in conversations about consent, we confuse two conversations. There's the law, and then there's what's right. And those things don't always align perfectly. And so while what happened might technically not be illegal or a technical violation that you could
no,
like
it could probably be
arrested,
sexual
even
assault.
if,
It
right,
could be, yes,
even if it
right.
could have, though,
It's
even
still
if,
not right.
that doesn't mean it's right. And I think this raises points that other people might make, which is like, oh, they're married. And right, like there can be spousal rape, there could be lack of consent, or non-consensual sex that takes place within a relationship and within a marriage. And so like these things, and which was, by the way, not illegal for a really, really long time, right? Spousal rape wasn't recognized for a really long time in America. So I think it's just important to remember that just because something might be legal or not necessarily like persecute, like you could persecute somebody, that doesn't mean that it's right. And to me, what she did was wrong. And I could get to why I think she did what she did. And I think that's also a really, really important point, which, if you want to talk about the Judah and Tamar story, relates to me.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I do, because for those people who are watching who are Bible geeks, and I think I said this in the description, like my husband says, if you've read the Bible and you've read Greek mythology and you throw in a Shakespeare or two, you pretty much covered every story in that we could probably hit. So this one was just very reminiscent to us. Somebody challenged me and said there was another rape analogy, but this is not a rape issue that I was raising with Judah and Tamar. The story of Judah and Tamar has to do with basically spilling seed, like not using the ejaculate because you don't want to have kids. And the truth is, can you just,
That's so funny. I thought you were talking about a different part of the story.
well, both. In other words, I'm
Yeah.
talking about both parts of the story, right? So Judah has two sons, Er and Onan. And what are those names in English? Or do you know?
Air is not, I mean, there's
Er
air,
and
but
Onan.
onan is, I mean, it
Onan.
doesn't mean anything in English, but it became the English word onanism, which
Right.
is the English word for ejaculation or
Outside of the vagina.
outside of anything.
Correct.
In reference
Right.
to homosexuality.
So basically, the older son marries this woman, Tamar. They do not have any children. He dies. So then, as according to Jewish law, he then marries the second son, Onan, who also now doesn't want her to get pregnant and therefore keeps ejaculating outside of her. And so then he dies too. And now Judah, the father, doesn't want to marry her to the third son, which he's supposed to do so that she can have children. And so he kind of shoves her aside to just get old and decrepit and not have children. And then Tamar decides to take matters into her own hands. This is why I think the story is so interesting. And she dresses herself up as a prostitute. I think this is how my son learned the word harlot when he was like 7. He was like, I always say the Bible is the best way to teach about sex. Anyway, so true. Anyway, so then she dresses herself up as a prostitute and then basically comes on to Judah, him not knowing who she is, sleeps with Judah, gets pregnant by Judah, And then Judah finds out she's pregnant and realizes that's no idea it's from him. And he's going to take her out to burn her. That we could talk about, burn her alive. And then she proves to him that she's pregnant from him. And all of a sudden he says, she's right, I'm wrong. And so so now within that context, the idea of a woman having a baby being sort of the ultimate purpose of the marriage, and her feeling like he never said to her that he was specifically trying not to have kids. Like that wasn't part of their contract. I feel like there was this unwritten contract that nobody's talking about that was completely violated by him, that she was trying to kind of rewrite the contract. But you can say what you want to say,
No, I think that's a really interesting framing. So to me, in both of these stories, what we have is a woman who is really at the mercy of a patriarchal structure.
The whole show was that. The whole show was showing you how the women, one after the other, was at the mercy of the male whims. Yes.
And then also showing how each woman in her own way worked within that structure, either successfully or unsuccessfully, but got what they wanted and tried to own their destiny. And in both of these stories, what you have is a woman who takes matters into her own hands, and through some not complete sharing of information or lack of consent, gets what she feels that she needs in order to
survive,
to thrive, to live her life and survive. Even I wouldn't say right, to survive.
I said survive. Yeah, in order to survive,
survive in the world that she has put herself in. So I'm not saying this to in any way ever justify non-consensual sexual behavior, because it's not justifiable. But it's important to recognize, I think, that oftentimes non-consensual behavior is an outgrowth of a systemic problem, a problem in which a situation in which there isn't clear communication, there isn't mutuality, there isn't equanimity between partners. And that leads to manipulation, that leads to lying and forcing. And those kinds of behaviors are really problematic and are actually the outgrowth of a broader, more problematic system. And somebody commented here, if she had all the facts, she may not have married him. To me, I think part of the problematic system in Bridgerton that we're talking about here is the abject lack of knowledge on the part of women, and how all of the access of that knowledge is controlled by men. And because she didn't
she might have had to marry him anyway, because if you remember, she had to marry him because they were caught kissing in the and then her entire life was sort of going to crumble in front of her if she didn't marry him, right?
Right. So even if she needed to marry him anyway, but my point is that there were so many issues within this system of women living with consequences that they didn't fully understand. I think you could argue that I forgot that character's name, the girl who's pregnant.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's living with a concept, and she does these horrible manipulative things, but by the end you're like, oh my God, what else are you supposed to do? That when we have issues of systemic power, particularly when they're men who are in control of things, it creates these horrible circumstances where the choices for women are just bad. They're just bad choices available to them. And I really empathize with that, because it's really tough to have to choose between two really, really difficult things.
Right. No, I feel like that, to me, I was thinking about the whole breach of contract piece, because everything you're saying is 100% correct. This idea that the women had no power and they had to be manipulative and almost sly and underhanded to get what they needed, just what they needed. And what was so crazy to me was that she entered into this contract with this guy basically without any information. We talked about the lack of information. But the truth is, to a certain degree, she entered into a different contract that he entered. And the non-ejaculating in her was part of his contract, but kind of never a part of her contract. So I don't know. To my mind, that to me felt like, I guess it felt to me, and this is where maybe I'm wrong. I'm totally, that her flipping over to have him ejaculate in her was almost like a testing to see was he really not doing this on purpose? Was he doing this on purpose? It didn't feel exactly to me like she was saying, I am going to get this guy to ejaculate to have my babies, right?
Yeah,
right?
I hear that. And I've heard people interpret the scene that way. Like somebody else I spoke to was like, she herself wasn't even 100% sure what
What
she
was
was
right,
doing. And
because
there was,
if she was, then somehow she probably, it feels to me like if she wanted to be manipulative, she could have carried this on. Like she could have acted like she had no idea what was going on. Do you know what I'm saying? She wasn't a manipulative character in general.
right. I hear
Um,
that.
so, but that doesn't, I should go back and watch the scene again. If it's really clear, because I also had this feeling like he could have stopped it if he really wanted to, but that's not a really good argument because we don't like that argument with women that they could be saying, stop more severely,
Right.
right?
Correct.
We hate that argument. It's not,
Yeah, I do hate that argument. I want to just address one comment that was made about her, like the fact that her mother didn't tell her anything and that the flow of knowledge is blocked by another woman. And I totally hear that. And it broke my heart to watch that scene. And I also like recognize that that is no different. Like it's just exactly the same now. I mean, listen, there are some fabulous exceptions, my mother being one of them. I feel so grateful that my
is
parents
your
and
mom watching?
I don't think my mom has an Instagram, but I'll tell her all about it. But like my mom told me all about, I've always been able to talk to my mom about sex, but that's very, very rare. And I think like moms who are watching this and moms who have watched Bridgerton, like learn, like it is better for your daughters and your sons and your everyone's to learn about these things from you. The way that you want your kids to find out about these things is not, well, it worked for me and I found about it through this like horrible and uncomfortable and somewhat awkward way. So that's fine. Like, no,
Or,
like we
or
give
what about, or what about, again, I don't remember the names. The young woman, she was amazing. The young woman, the really adorable redhead, the kind of chubby one who was befriended the niece who was visiting, the pregnant niece, and who has no idea what's going on. Like, why? How did she get pregnant if she's not
oh
married?
my
It,
gosh.
it must be because they were in love. If you fall in love, you get pregnant. Like it was totally,
And then
and
they're like,
she
we can't
was
fall in love.
and she was like smart. Those girls were smart, and they're like detectives. They're gonna figure out what the hell is going on. And you're looking and you're thinking to yourself. Meanwhile, what's shocking is the boys
All the boys.
all knew what was what. Like all of them. Like so they're learning on the lower class
It's
women.
the modern equivalent of porn,
Yes,
right? Like
exactly. 100%.
young boys. I mean, there are some young girls who do have access to porn and do watch porn. However, mostly young men, by the time they're in middle school, almost all young boys have seen porn, and like and girls just have no idea. And what
Feel
that
what's
does
going
is
on.
it
Right.
creates, and it's fascinating to see it in like a sex education context. Boys will make jokes about women's bodies that women don't understand. Like the girls don't understand what they're saying, and they like laugh or like think it's funny or totally don't get it. And it's actually this recreation of a power dynamic that comes about through lack of knowledge and like the power of knowledge. It's not just about like the power of, oh, I have this money, or oh, I'm, the man of the household. It's actually like the power of knowledge is so, so huge that like when we do not give knowledge to our women or to anybody, we really are putting them at a serious, serious disadvantage.
All right. I think we have to stop. I could go on for another half hour with you, and I'm going to
Probably.
have you come back. I'm so glad you're on Instagram now. Somebody just asked if we can discuss faith, Christianity, and masturbation, and that is such another huge topic, huge, huge topic. But maybe Aura will come back with me from her divinity school, and we could talk about Christianity and Judaism and masturbation. And
I love talking to
um,
you about Sheva. I'll come on Evs.
oh my God. So I hope this sort of opened up your ways of thinking about. That's all we wanted to do is open up your ways of thinking about things. I will go back to the fact that sex education is critical, as Aura was just saying, and that if this in any way turns you on, you should use those fantasies. Either watch it with your partner if your partner can stand watching it, whatever,
The big
or
if.
yeah, I know exactly. Or don't. Just imagine yourself. Just have fun with this because it is really a fun show. So anyway, Ora, thank you so much for doing this with me on such short notice. And everybody, thank you for your comments. And feel free to like DM me with more comments, and I'll pass them on to Ora. But we hope you got you thinking just a little bit differently about this because I think it's really a big issue.
Thanks. So nice to be
Mwah.
here. Bye, everyone. Good night.
Good night.